Thank you, Josh. I always appreciate your singing. All of our song leaders leading us in song every Lord's Day. Sounds great. Thank you for being here this morning. Before we get going, I do want to put a plug in here, and I want to highlight something that we do here at Southern Ridge. I want to highlight our BK groups. I want to highlight our Brothers Keeper groups that we have here. If you don't know what these are small groups that we have kind of come up with, put together here at Southern Ridge. There's 4 Brothers Keeper groups. They're just small groups that consist maybe of, upwards to 1 to 15 or whatever as far as the number. But they're groups that we have put together. We try to meet throughout the year. We meet once a month. Each group may meet in different places. We try to meet in the goal of that was to try to meet in each other's homes. We share meals together. We sometimes maybe even play games together or whatever. But it's just a nice time to just get together and hang out with each other. It's a really good, I would say, relationship building experience. And I want to tell you that if you're not a part of a BK group, I will say you are missing out. You are missing out. Look, the Lord's church, we want to be together. We want people to know one another in God's church. And if you're not a part of one, you're really missing out on some good core fellowship opportunities, I would say. And if you're not a part of one and you want to be a part of one, or you're curious about what that is, tag along with somebody. Grab a BK leader or something like that. Just go and experience this. They're really good times to fellowship with one another, and I hope that you'll look into those things. But last weekend we had ours, and I'll tell you, it was so good just to sit down over some brunch. We had a brunch. Some people have dinners, whatever. Ours was brunch. It was great to sit down over a meal, have some coffee. Got to have the coffee in there. Thank you for Trey for having all the coffee that we needed. But it's good to just sit down across the table with fellow members, fellow brethren, and we had a good spiritual conversation. And that was so refreshing to me, and to do that with one another outside of this building. Then that's the point too. We want to get outside of this building. We don't want just our fellowship to be only the times that we come here. We want it to be outside of here. We want it to be in each other's homes like they had it in the first century, right? We want that. And it was very nice to do that. And I think as a congregation it is very healthy to have that. It's encouraging. It can be uplifting. You really can get to know one another better. But in those times, we always do really have good conversations when that happens. And it's interesting, kind of want to use that as a segue into this now. It's interesting how all of that we talked about was something that I was actually getting ready and preparing for today, actually, for today's sermon. And I had told the group that what we were discussing, I was going to talk about that very next week. And so those of you who were there, next week is here, so now you get to hear it. But what we were kind of talking about revolved around this idea here. Holiness in the presence of sin. Okay, and that's kind of a tricky topic a little bit, but holiness in the presence of sin. We had kind of been talking about, to some degree, that the challenge it is for Christians to be around people that do not live the same kind of lifestyle that we live. The challenge it is to maybe converse with those people sometimes, or the challenge it is to build a relationship with those people, or even just be around and in their presence. Sometimes that is a challenge for the Christian, and it's challenging for people who want nothing to do with sin. They don't want to be corrupted. They may not want to be influenced. They don't want to be around sin whatsoever, and rightfully so. I mean, you ran from all of that. Why would we want to be, getting ourselves back into it? And I understand that completely, and I don't think it's wrong to guard against that necessarily. if you need to. I think that's a mature thing to do. But at the same time, I think whenever we look, or when the Christian looks to Jesus, I think there's a couple of lessons that we can learn that I want to talk about today with that idea. Being holy in the presence of sin, in the presence of sinful people, in the presence of sinful situations, in the presence of sinful conversations or environments, whatever. Let's talk about that a little bit this morning. Every now and then, you may have heard this before too, but every now and then I hear a phrase said that goes something like this: God cannot dwell in the presence of sin. God cannot dwell in the presence of sin. And I think it comes from this thought that since God is so pure, since God is so holy, that there's no way that he could be around something that is so evil, something that is so dark, something that is totally against what he is, something that's totally against everything that he is. I mean, God is light after all, and in him there is no darkness at all. And so sometimes people may have this mentality that, well, God he can't be anywhere around sin then. I think it's also kind of connected to the idea that, God turning his face away when Jesus was on the cross because, well, he can't even look upon sin. He can't be in the presence of sin. That's what some people think. So I want to kind of address that misconception, but address it by looking at Jesus and how Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, dwelt among sin. And in doing so, we'll learn some things about Jesus and from Jesus. All right, so the passage that I want to be in this morning to talk about this is going to be in one of the Gospels in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, verses 10 through 13, that's where we're going to work out of primarily this morning. It's a very familiar passage to a lot of us, but we are going to read it, okay? So this is right after Jesus has called Matthew, the tax collector, and says that he pretty much just stands up and he walks right out of the tax booth and he follows Jesus. And then here's what we read immediately after that in Matthew chapter 9. It says, "Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, 'Why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners?' But when Jesus heard this, he said, 'It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick.' And then he says, 'But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners.'" So immediately after calling him, we see Jesus with Matthew in his house. Luke actually tells us in his gospel that this was a big reception that Matthew gave for Jesus at his house. And there was a great crowd of tax collectors and other people, he says, who were reclining at the table with them. Matthew was a tax collector. Matthew had other tax collector friends and those who were labeled as sinners. That's about the only people Matthew would have as friends, given the nature of his occupation. Tax collectors were known to kind of dip into the tax bucket a little bit and take some for themselves. People didn't like tax collectors, so it makes sense. This is who his friends and people at this reception would be. Now, right off the bat, though, what do we see? What do we see? Well, we see that Jesus is in the presence of sin, if you will. I mean, verse 10 literally says that sinners and Jesus are in the same verse, and they're reclining at the table together. So this idea that God can't dwell in the presence of sin simply just is not true. I mean, the Holy One, the righteous one, the Messiah, God is in sin's presence. And so it is possible for God to be around sin. Now, what is true though, is that God will not dwell in eternity with sin. That is true. Okay, he can handle sin. He can be around sin. God's been around sin since the garden with Adam and Eve. He's been around sin all of forever. I mean, but the one thing that he won't do is that when eternity gets here, he's not going to live with sin. He can tolerate it now. He's not going to live with it forever. Okay? And I hope that makes sense. But that's the idea. But now that we kind of have that out of the way at least, we still learn some things here with what we read about Jesus. And the first thing is, as we look at this account with him being around and at this house and at this reception, the first thing that we learn is that Jesus didn't run from a golden opportunity. Jesus didn't run from a golden opportunity that he had right here. I'm sure Jesus knew that if there was going to be some sort of banquet, some sort of reception, thrown at a tax collector's house, he's probably going to invite some other folks there that would be close, that he would be close to, which would be other tax collectors. So I'm sure Jesus knew the kind of people that he would be around for this occasion. But what you don't see is Jesus saying, look, Matthew, I appreciate the invite, man. I really do. I appreciate it, but I just don't know if I'm going to be able to go and be around that environment. I know some of your friends. I get it. Again, I really do appreciate it, but I just don't think that I would feel comfortable being around all of that. I think I'm going to have to pass on this one. Okay, now, I'm definitely not saying that if you ever get an invitation like this, that you should just suck it up and not worry about your spirituality one bit. I'm definitely not saying that, okay? But I am trying to say, and I am trying to show you, that Jesus isn't necessarily shying away from this opportunity, okay? He is willing to be there. He is willing to go. He is willing to sit at the same table with these people, talk with them, share a meal with them. He's not repulsed by these people. He doesn't distance himself from these people. He, I think, recognizes that this is a golden opportunity to perhaps make an impact on some of these people that need God, and so he fully embraces this. So we also can't look at this account and think that Jesus is just hanging out with a bunch of tax collectors and sinners just to hang out with them. We can't look at it like this either. No, he's not just hanging out with them, and he's not approving of the things that they're doing or even engaging in the things that they might have been doing. He has a different purpose in mind, and that is to spend time with them, so that maybe he could build a relationship with them and hopefully help move them toward changing their life around. You see, there's a balance here that Jesus fully understood. And when we're talking about holiness in the presence of sin, Jesus understood the difference between a careless decision and an intentional action. And he did not run away from a golden opportunity. But he understands that balance right there. So what do we learn from Jesus in this? Well, I think we learn to recognize opportunities where holiness can be in the presence of sin. Now listen, you may not get the same kind of opportunity like Jesus had where a reception is thrown on your behalf, outside of maybe a wedding or whatever, but where all that is just thrown on your behalf, randomly, and all these people are coming in. But you may get presented with other opportunities. Other opportunities to let holiness be amongst sin. Okay? There will be times in your life, even if you are not looking for it, where people and their lifestyles that they are living, there's going to be times where they will cross your path and come into your life. There will be those times. You might, like I said, find yourself at a wedding reception. I'm just trying to apply this, okay? You might find yourself at a wedding reception and people are around, doing things that they do at wedding receptions, okay? Maybe you even find yourself on a work trip, let's say, for some sort of training or something. And, a lot of times after the business is done for the day or the seminar or whatever it is, when the business is over, people want to go play, right? If you know what I mean. And maybe they want to invite you to go to dinner. That's a possibility. You might be in school even, and you might be around classmates they're not Christians, and maybe they want to talk about all the partying that they do and stuff over the weekend, or maybe the people that they are all their other stuff that they might be involved with, okay? Maybe if you're even an athlete, okay, and you're on a team, you've got people on your team that might be careless in their speech, maybe a little bit loose with their morals, and they're not spiritual people. But whatever it is, whatever your place in life, okay, there may be times where you find yourself in situations like this, like with what Jesus had, or you're presented with these opportunities where you might be one among many. And then you're going to have a decision to make. You're going to have a decision to make. You can either remove yourself from the situation, you can run, you can give people maybe the cold shoulder. You can walk out of the room. You can say no to the invitation. Or you can recognize that you may have an opportunity in front of you. You might have an opportunity to be a positive influence and make an impact on somebody's life. You might have an opportunity to build a relationship with someone. You might have an opportunity to share your story and talk about how you became a Christian. You might have an opportunity to tell them or teach them something about the Bible and how what you learned in the Bible has affected your life for the good. Okay, you might have an opportunity to let your light shine in such a way that they may see your good works and then they can glorify the Father who is in heaven. You might have that opportunity. And they might look at you in those moments, they might look at you and see something about you that is different. And they might see that you carry yourself differently than how other people carry themselves. They may hear the way that you speak and say, you don't speak the same way like kind of everybody else does. You don't reason through things the same way that I see that other people reason through things. They may see that you are different, and it just might pique their interest and ask why. They might do that. You see, sometimes it's all in how you look at it. One person could look and see a room full of sinners. They can look and see a room full of brokenness, broken people, and no hope, and a room full of people with different views and different beliefs and different lifestyles, and they don't want nothing to do with it. It's fine. But the other person might see a room full of opportunity. They might see a room full of broken people that need Jesus. And you can either completely avoid the situations altogether, or you can recognize a golden opportunity when you see one. And when it's presented, to bring holiness in the presence of sin. You never know. Okay? But you could make a difference. It's all in how you look at it. One other thing that we don't read when Jesus was around these people. We don't read that Jesus was tainted, by no means. Okay? We don't read that Jesus became less spiritual somehow, or that he even wanted to join in their lifestyle after having been around these people. So the other thing that we learn here about Jesus is that Jesus was spiritually strong enough to handle it. He was spiritually strong enough to handle this. Now I know there might be the temptation to say, well, that's Jesus, of course. He's the Son of God. How would he not be strong enough to handle it? But, I get it, but was Jesus tempted in all things as we are? Or was he not? Okay, Jesus had a human side, y'all. Jesus had a human side. He was still able to be tempted, okay? Satan tried that for 40 days. But it doesn't mean that he gave into it. We know he didn't give into that, okay? He was strong enough to handle it. He was strong enough to be around these tax collectors and sinners, people who lived very different lifestyles than him, and he is able to be in their presence without being corrupted. Okay, so what we learn then from Jesus in that is that if holiness is going to be in the presence of sin, what we learn is that we must be spiritually developed. Must be spiritually developed. It is not a good idea to put yourself in situations when you are not spiritually strong enough to handle it. Okay? What good would that do if, to be around the environment or insert yourself into some conversation sometimes or situations, yet you lose your own soul in the process because you get drugged back into it? What good would that do? That wouldn't do any good. Okay, so this part, this is where you have to be real with yourself. You got to be real with yourself. Okay, we have to know, you have to know your limits and make sure that you don't overestimate how strong you might be, because sometimes the temptation might be a little stronger than you. It's a possibility. You have to understand that if you're going to have an influence on somebody, change the way they think, change their actions because of you. If you're going to have an influence on people, your spirituality might play a part in that. It might determine that. Okay, so you have to be real with yourself and know that, you may not be as strong as brother or sister so-and-so. Doesn't mean you can't get there, but you need to know your weaknesses. Okay, you need to know your weaknesses. You need to know the areas in which you are not strong in. It's okay, but you just got to know that. All right, you need to know those areas and know what temptation could possibly lead you astray. You have to know yourself and know where you are vulnerable so that you can guard against that. All right, I hope that makes sense. But you got to know yourself. This is an extreme hypothetical, okay? But just bear with me. Look, if you used to struggle with alcohol, I wouldn't go and do your evangelism inside of a bar. Okay? Is that fair enough? I wouldn't do that, okay? So you got to be real with yourself. You can't leave yourself open like that. All right? You've got to know your limits at the same time, and you've got to be spiritually developed enough to handle what you may encounter and what you may end up being around. So maybe, to kind of add on to that, maybe if you, I don't know, find yourself in these situations or opportunities you get, maybe before stepping into those, whatever situation it is, whatever environment that may not be godly, maybe you just ask yourself this question: is my light bright enough to not go out in the presence of darkness? Is the flame strong enough? Is the light bright enough? Insert whatever you want. You understand? Is my light bright enough that I could be in these situations, I could be around this environment, and it would not go out? Am I strong enough? So maybe you let that be something that helps you determine whether or not you are ready or not, and it might prevent you from an even worse situation, you getting led astray in the process. Okay? Now, let's clean all of this up, okay? And let's talk about this. What was the purpose of Jesus being around these people? Why does he ultimately allow himself to be around them? Well, it's clearly stated there in verses 12 and 13. Because sick people need a physician, and sinners is who he came to call. This is the reason for it all. Okay, Jesus accepting the invitation to go to Matthew's house, recline at the table, and dine with the tax collectors and sinners was not a careless decision. This was a purposeful action. It wasn't a careless thing that he did. He's trying to make an impact on their life so that he could call them to repentance, something few people understood. Certainly the Pharisees didn't understand. They're wondering, what in the world are you doing hanging out with these tax collectors and sinners? They didn't get it. Hardly anybody got what he was doing. But he took an opportunity. He was strong enough to handle it, and it was for a purpose. Now let's bring all of that together for us. Okay? Sometimes when you are presented with opportunities where holiness can be in the presence of sin, be spiritually strong enough to take them, and in the back of your mind, remember what you are doing it for. You're doing it because Jesus first loved you. Jesus saved you. Therefore, you love so that Jesus can save them. That's why you're doing it. That's the whole point. That's why you would accept these things like this. That's the reason. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, holiness in the presence of sin, it's challenging for a Christian. Okay, it really is. And this is kind of what we got to talking about at the table the other morning. It's challenging, and it's challenging because sometimes we get caught between like two temptations. We're caught between those. You have on one hand, the temptation to isolate ourselves from the situation altogether, or the temptation to compromise and kind of let our guard down. On one hand, we don't want to engage and we don't want to be around anything that's sinful at all. And on the other hand, we might be scared that we're going to be led astray. You're kind of caught in between the two. But like with so many other things that we learn when we look at Jesus, I think we see the balance in Jesus. In that, yes, he was able to be around sin and around people who lived different lifestyles, yes. But he still guarded himself. And he understood this, that eating together and sinning together are not the same thing. Eating together and sinning together are two completely different things. He understood that. He knew his intent and he knew his purpose. And so I think, in the same way, well, we too need to understand that balance, that it is possible for holiness to be in the presence of sin without being corrupted. Okay? You don't have to run from every single moral difference that you encounter. You can look at them too as opportunities. But if you choose to engage, you must strengthen yourself, remember what it's all about, and that is bringing the lost to Jesus. That's what it's all about. There is a rhyme to the reason with this stuff. This is why you would do it, okay? But you got to be strong enough. You got to recognize opportunities when they're there. Take them, but always remember that. Always remember that. And I think we learn that when we look at this account in Matthew 9 from Jesus. Listen, I want to say, if Jesus is not in your life, if the relationship isn't there as much as you would like it to be, or it intrigues you in some way, we want to help you have a better relationship with Jesus. You know what Jesus said at the beginning of his prayer in John 17 and verse 3? He said, "This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." You want eternal life? You've got to know who Jesus is. And I'm not talking about just knowing about him. I'm talking about knowing him. There's a difference in that. You know, people know a lot about Michael Jordan, but they don't know Michael Jordan, do they? Not a lot of people. Well, there's a difference. Listen, we here want to help you. This is part of my job. I want to help people know who Jesus is, because eternal life is at stake, and that's what we want. We want to help people get to know Jesus so that their soul can be saved and go to heaven and be a part of the church and all of that. That's what we want. If you are subject at all to that invitation, we invite you to be in a relationship with Jesus. Jesus invites you to be in a relationship with him. If that's you today, let us know as we stand and sing.